The museum is a mirror of the Jatta family, whose members were exemplary 19th century collectors of antiquities, the careful guardians of artistic and historical relics, excavated in the area amid the climate of devastation and plunder typical of archaeological excavations in the 18th and 19th centuries. Giovanni Jatta Sr., born at Ruvo di Puglia, was a jurist at the Bar of Naples. With his brother Giulio and sister-in-law Giulia Viesti, he was moved by a love of beauty and desirous of preventing the dispersal abroad of the artistic artifacts from ancient Ruvo to build a palazzo on the Mosta. The four rooms of the museum display numerous examples of pottery, much of it by Attic, Italiot and Apulian masters, forming a crescendo that exalts the quality and the aesthetic value of the contents and forms. The cabinets with the shelves, and especially the fluted columns, made of wood and painted in imitation of marble, were all personally designed by Giovanni Jatta. The Jatta collection, rich in artifacts and furnishings, passed into the possession of the Italian state with two deeds of sale of 1990 and 1991. In 1993, a ministerial decree established the Jatta National Museum, and in 2012, the museum venue was acquired with further spaces. In the first room, in the middle of the left-hand wall, a Latin inscription installed in 1842 by Giovanni Jatta Jr. commemorates his father Giulio and his uncle Giovanni, praising the care, extreme commitment and great expense with which they acquired items that emerged from the tombs of ancient Ruvo to the glory and ornament of the city. This space includes nearly 600 exhibits, which Giovanni Jr. described as pottery, namely ceramic objects without figurative decoration. Together with numerous vases, it contains a group of over 100 clay figurines, which had cultic and funerary purposes, comprising images of deities, donors and animals. In the middle of the room stands a dolium, a large vessel used to store food such as cereals and legumes, commonly found in storerooms. Clay figurines, produced mostly in the 4th and 3rd centuries BC, is a very interesting part of the collection. These were objects made in clay molds and originally brightly painted in different colors. Most of them are female figures represented standing or seated and shown as offering fruits. They are dressed in a long garment called a chiton and the himation, the cloak that covers the arm and body. There are also tintinabula in the form of a piglet. They took their name from the ringing sound made by a pebble inside them. On the lower shelves of the showcases there are numerous vases with geometric decorations, which come from different parts of Puglia and were mostly used in funerary rituals. Showcase 4 exhibits two ollas or pot-bellied vases with a big funnel-shaped lip, produced at Canosa in the 6th century BC. In Showcase 5 there are two trozzelle, the traditional vases of the Salento, ancient Messapia, which took their names from the trozze or wheels applied to the handles. Nearly all the vases presented in Showcase 8 fall into the class known as black glazed pottery, produced in several regions of the Mediterranean between the 4th and 1st centuries BC in imitation of ceramics made in the Athens region. The second room, the biggest in the museum, begins the exhibition of red-figured pottery with just under 700 vases, produced by the workshops of potters in Lucania and above all Apulia in the 5th and 4th centuries BC. The central crater, dated to about 320 BC and attributed to the Baltimore painter, is the largest figured vase in the whole collection and the richest in decoration. In the crowd of images covering the whole surface of the vase, the principal scene is the dramatic death of the Niobids. This crater was a funerary vessel. This theme is expressed by the scene on the other side, dominated by the deceased, who is exalted as a warrior with his horse in a shrine with columns and a pediment. Another frequent theme in tomb furnishings is a representation of the deceased, shown travelling to the world of the dead, depicted in the symbolic form of a leave-taking, the warrior's farewell, which is repeated on some column craters, all dating from the mid to late 4th century BC. Similarly, the recurrent presence of Heracles is always explained by the significance that his life has in the funerary sphere. In the exhibits displayed in this room, as well as on red-figured vases in general, ample space is also given to the world of Dionysius and the figures in his retinue, the Maenads, wrapped in flowing drapery, and satyrs, men with the tails and horns of goats. Apart from appearing in funerary rituals, the cult of Dionysius was expressed particularly in the symposium, a convivial ritual which concluded banquets in the Greek world. The genre scenes depict aspects of everyday life which were felt to be particularly significant in Greek culture and the Apulian world. Of particular interest are the bronze and iron objects, presented in new display cases after restoration work carried out between 2005 and 2009. They come from aristocratic tombs, and especially male grave furnishings, where the panoply, the whole armour that accompanied the deceased man during the funeral, acquired a symbolic significance as exalting their military value and social prestige. This gallery also preserves some important inscriptions from the Roman period, one of which is a record of the urban renewal program for the ancient town of Rubi, which had been made a municipium and added to the Roman administrative system as a result of the Civil War. In the recess in the middle of the left wall, the portrait carved in marble of Giovanni Jatta Jr., who was responsible for the definitive layout of the museum, anticipates that of Giovanni Jatta Sr., his uncle and the founder of the museum collection. His portrait is displayed in the last room, which brings the course of the exhibition to a close, but it can already be seen from the entrance through the enfilade of all the doors. According to the criterion of choice adopted for the whole collection, pieces of great value of red figure pottery are displayed here, considered finer than those in the previous room, partly because of their rare mythological stories, sometimes painted in complex scenes and a continuous narrative covering the whole surface of the vase. Among these, particular emphasis is given to two outstanding Apulian craters exhibited on the columns in the middle of the room. The older, from the last 2 decades of the 5th century BC, is attributed to one of the first important Apulian pottery artists, the Sisyphus painter. One of the most skilled potters of the mid-4th century BC, the Lycurgus painter, is credited with the other central crater, which devotes ample space to the labours of Heracles. Next to the marble bust, to the right, is a column crater dating from the late 5th century BC. It represents the myth of Bellerophon, who, riding his winged horse Pegasus, fought against the Chimera, in the presence of Athena, who is armed with helmet, spear and shield. The passion for rare items which inspired the composition of the collection is given one of its finest expressions in this room in the rita, drinking vessels used at banquets or for votive and ritual purposes. The lower ends of these vases are shaped like the heads of animals. An additional interest is provided by a series of vases with plastic modelling, also exhibited in room 4, such as the rita, representing the heads of black people or women. The last room, the smallest in the museum, contains about 170 items, including Attic and Apulian vases and objects, made of metal, glass and glass paste. On the end wall of the room, the marble portrait of the founder of the museum, Giovanni Jatta Sr., is turned significantly to face the exhibit that he himself considered the masterpiece of his collection on the column in the centre. This vase, which has almost become a symbol of the museum and sometimes even the city of Ruvo, is an Attic volute crater dating from the late 5th century BC, made by the artist known as the Talos painter, with reference to the protagonist of the scene depicted on its primary side. The series of fine vases placed on the other column start from the left with a Napoleon Calyx crater dating from the early 4th century BC, which represents a lively banqueting scene, representing the game of kotabos, in which the banqueters used to cast the wine drops left in the cup into a bowl at the top of an upright post. Among the other vases placed in prominent positions, all of them Apulian workmanship, the one to the right of the entrance is outstanding. This is a volute crater dating from the late 5th or early 4th century BC and attributed to the painter of the birth of Dionysius, another great Apulian master of pottery decoration. The modern showcase contains numerous metal exhibits, in addition to those preserved in Room 2, completing the documentation of these very valuable artifacts, which enriched the burials of prominent people and wealthy members of the community.